Chauffeurs who drive around rich people. What are some of the weird shocking conversations you have overheard? Not a chauffeur, but this happened because of a lack of one. Basically, a guy I used to know back when we were teenagers, 17 years old, had a lot of money. We just never knew how much until I was invited to go on holiday with him and some other friends. All expenses paid, of course. Anyway, we took a taxi to an area where this guy wanted to buy an apartment and wanted to show us, so we went with him and ended up spending the whole day walking around the area. We got tired and eventually wanted to go back to the house, but we were so far away that walking was not an option unless we wanted to walk for about 3 hours. Neither of us had enough cash to pay for a taxi, and back then taxis didn't accept cards. This was around 2000 or 2001 BTW, so this guy rings his dad and asks if he could send a chauffeur to pick us up. But the chauffeur turns out was busy doing some deliveries for the dad. So instead the dad says there's a Mercedes-Benz dealer shop near where you are. I know the manager there as I've bought several cars from them. Just go there and buy there and buy there and buy there. You can leave it in the house and we'll figure out how to bring it home later. So we went to this dealer shop and somehow in about 30 minutes the manager did all the paperwork and we ended up driving back to the house in a brand new Mercedes C-Class, which we used for the rest of the holiday. Frick. Billy Bob Thornton was doing radio press for a movie about to come out, meaning he had to stop by 6-7 radio stations for interviews. He wanted to have a cigarette in the vehicle on the way to the next interview, but I had to let him know our company has a no smoking policy in our vehicles. He asked me to call the owner to make an exception, but the owner said no and it's a $250 cleaning fee if he smoked in the vehicle. He asked to stop by a bank, came out and handed me $5,000 cash and said here's for the whole goddamn pack. He smoked in the car the rest of the trip. Later I got up the nerve to ask him if that's the most expensive pack of cigarettes he's ever smoked. All he said was not even close, never explained it further. I think about him often. Picked up a wedding party, bride, bridesmaid, and bride's boyfriend who was paying for the wedding. They had a magnum of champagne and we drove around for quite some time while they snorted C in the back. They were using rolled up $50s and $20s, then tossing them to me in the front seat as tip money. I dutifully brushed off each bill and added them to my wallet, pretending not to know what was going on. The couple argued off and on about showing up to the wedding. Apparently she felt weird about getting married and he was trying to convince her it was a good idea. Finally dropped them off at the church and he slipped me a matchbook with his name and number written on it. Yeah, it was the late 80s and I was a young woman. One of the only female limo drivers at the time in that city. Scored a sweet leather jacket with the tips from that night. So many weird stories. I was a bouncer at a club in the 80s and only 18. I never knew sex and tanning booths were so common. It was like a pulp novel unfolding in front of me. I was so naive. When we were in high school, my friend used to caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he would be willing to drive him around while he went out partying. This was like 2003 and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 PM. Right off the bat, the guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit. My friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him another $200 and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of coke. They went to another bar. He handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple hours later with a girl. He was married with kids. He handed my friend another $200 and they went back to her house. After they fricked, he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. At this point it was like 2-3 AM. My friend said that the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water up to his ankles, in his shoes, threw a bunch of rocks into the water and then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. None of us really believed my friend when this happened until the guy he drove got arrested for assault and possession of C like 6 months later. I used to know a chauffeur. He ended up driving around some big stars. He was big dude, like 6 feet 8 inches and super muscular. His best story was when he was driving around a few WWE, WWF back then, stars, and they awkwardly asked him to not get out and open the door for them because he'd make them look smaller. Friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osmond. Fairly simple gig. Go to airport and pick up Marie Osmond, who was to be the featured entertainer at a private event. Plane comes in, he meets her. She has Karen bag but her checked suitcase, containing her stage dresses and makeup, is missing. She is unflappable, though, asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects 2 long sequined cocktail dresses and goes to the fitting room to try them on. Without him, of course. Unfortunately, there are 2 entrances and exits to the fitting room, and Marie Osmond exits out through the other side and cannot find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the side she'd entered. 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong. So he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osmond. The manager thinks she is being pranked and declines. Chauffeur buddy is in mini panic mode now, running wildly around the store asking random customers, have you seen Marie Osmond? Have you seen Marie Osmond? Store security is summoned and he is asked to leave the premises right now. He calls his employer and tells them he has lost Marie Osmond. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number but has her agent's number and he is not accepting calls. She has in the meantime taken a cab to the gig, thinking she has been forgotten. Lots of apologies eventually ensued and there were no repercussions. Buddy of mine ended up picking up a Netflix producer while doing Uber. He said they had a great conversation as he brought him to his hotel. The producer invited him up for a drink and since my friend was a film student he thought it'd be a good idea to go and try to get some good networking in. They hung out for about an hour when he asked my friend if he knew of any massage places with happy endings. He didn't, but the guy paid him $500 to bring him to the closest massage place, which was only a few miles out. Upon dropping him off he gave my buddy a card and said, there's a big party festival I'm hosting. That's your ticket in. I'll let you know then if I get that happy ending, haha. He got the happy ending. Not a conversation and not me, but definitely weird, shocking, and disgusting. A friend of mine who worked in music was in a limo with Robin Thicke and a load of dancers and models driving round London. They're all just chatting and whatnot, and out of nowhere, Robin Thicke just starts going down on one of the models. There was an awkward split-second silence, and then everyone just carried on and ignored it. Holy crap. I have a Robin Thicke story too. One of the administrative assistants at my work went to Vegas and met Robin Thicke there. He asked her at the bar if she wanted to come back to his room. When she said sure, he whipped out an NDA to have her sign. Dude cheated on his wife so much that he had paperwork drawn up so the women couldn't tell on him. My aunt was a driver for actors, mainly when they'd have shoots here in Oregon. She drove Woody Harrelson around for a time and she said he smoked weed constantly and she was always worried she'd lose her job, lol. I used to drive limousine and taxi. One time I got the manager of a fairly famous Canadian band in my car asking me where to buy coke. I had no idea where and I told him that. So his bright idea was to find a prostitute, hire her and ask her. I told him I couldn't help him pick up prostitutes either. He was disappointed but understood. He had me drive down a well-known street until he saw a prostitute. He asked me to pull over, got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and then immediately flagged me down again as a new ride. I knew what was up, but whatever. He gets back into the car with the prostitute and she tells him exactly what house to go to for some coke. I take them there and wait a bit. They come back out and I drive him back to the venue. Then he offers me 2 free tickets to the show, which I gladly accepted as love that band and had seen them 3 times. Alas, since I was still working during the show, I gave them away to 2 friends who had never seen the band. They had a good time and I had a fun story to share with them about how I scored those tickets. Not really a shocking conversation and hardly a famous person, but it was interesting how easily and full of trust people can be about searching out and buying drugs in a strange city. For the record, this was 2003. My dad was a chauffeur when I was younger and he told me of one story driving the director of a company down the road with the Blackpool illuminations in the company limousine. The director was standing up out of the sunroof with his arms out waving at people as he drove past. What the people on the street didn't know is that in the back of the limo there were 2 prostitutes blowing him. Out of all of the answers, this is the one that made me go yep, that sounds about right. Freaking Blackpool. I've had multiple people pay me handsomely to let them smoke weed in the car. Heard a French guy yelling at his wife that $10,000 was too much to pay for 2 bracelets that she bought. Also overheard a lot business deals with absurd amount of money referenced, like tens of millions. I've had conversations at work where I've said just buy the 2 of the dang things, it's only $25k. Kind of crazy to from that to debating if I wanting to keep my HBO subscription that night. Drove LIMO at Marquette University during undergrad and grad school. Some of the students that went there were obscenely wealthy. Limos are the vans that drive drunk students anywhere on campus and a few blocks outside of campus. A couple things I remember randomly from it. 1. Drunk guy leaves his wallet on a van and another driver calls it in so me and another supervisor can take it to campus police. We pick up the wallet from the driver and open it to get the student it so they know who to email. There had to be a few grand in there, and when we called the kid to tell him about it he told us we could just keep it because it was too far from his dorm to bother picking up. Okay. 2. I picked up a couple girls from Ohio and they spent the entire ride talking about how it was ridiculous that one of the girls' parents planned on making her pay for her own apartment after graduation and there was nothing even livable under $2k a month. The school is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 3. Mardi Gras is the name of a campus ministry trip where you use your spring break to build houses and drink in somewhere that doesn't get snow in April. One of the people on my van was getting a free night of drinks from his buddies because he paid for everyone's trips. I think it was like $1,500 per person if I recall correctly. 4. Rich kids are rich but foreign rich kids are usually on a different level. Was talking to a guy from Spain who said his dad did something with movies over there. IDK. He had an actual Rolex on and ended the conversation with so anyways, do you know where to find an EM? 5. It is a free service and a frat star tried to pay me for the ride with a Ziploc baggie of C. I said no and he called me a legend and left a $20 in the cuff holder before I realized it. This is not a limo story, but this thread reminded me of a rich guy story. My daughter played soccer for many years and at one practice, a guy drove up in a Ferrari, got out, and started talking to another of the dads on the team. After a few minutes, the guy left and another of the dads went over there and asked him who that guy was. He replied that the guy was his lawyer or something. I come to find out years later that guy in the Ferrari was a multimillionaire, had one and only one client, that dad. And his only job was to handle the dad's charitable donations. So this dude got filthy rich donating millions of dollars of somebody else's money and taking a percentage off the top. The dad, who was apparently worth several $100 million, never came across as rich at all. He wore sweats too and was at every practice and game. He drove a Camry, had been married to his average looking wife for like 25 years. Stuff like that. Acted like a normal guy like the rest of us. My sister was in a limo once and asked the driver about his most interesting ride. The driver said that he picked up some models who were going to a PETA demonstration. I'd rather be bare than in fur or whatever it was. He got to the location. They stripped naked in the back of limo, and he waited until they were done with the photo op. I remember that. The girl from Walking Dead was in that shoot. Not a chauffeur, but seemed like a good chance to remind people of the story of John Boner. At the time, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, third in line for the US presidency, not knowing how to use Uber. As the story goes, one of his aides downloaded the app onto his phone and showed him how to use it. Unknown to him, he'd been stuck on the carpooling option, Uber Pool. That's what he used for years. There are all sorts of tales of commuters hopping into their carpool and bam, there's John Boner stuck in a middle seat asking to get dropped off at the Capitol building. However you feel about his politics, I think that's pretty funny. One of my best friends used to drive Uber in a wealthy area of LA. He told me so many stories about drunk celebs and TikTokers in his car. Someone offered him a bag of weed because they felt sorry for their friend throwing up in the back seat. Most people were just normal though. Some highlights. Quentin Tarantino and Trisha Paytas were making out in his backseat when they were secretly dating lol. Mike Tyson is apparently very nice in person and also a giant pothead. Somebody on Gossip Girl and her friend were arguing about chicken nuggets and tried to get him to go through a Wendy's drive-thru during the lunch rush when there were 10 cars already in line. Addison Rae or one of her friends took their shoes off and left them in the car. Leo DiCaprio took more than 5 minutes to find the car. He seemed out of it and was quietly bobbing his head listening to music on his headphones. Wasn't exactly a chauffeur, but I did have the distinguished privilege of working with a multimillionaire one time for a couple days, and I was just astounded at how out of touch he was with people. One conversation he was talking about how he hated all the new homes they were building and he liked old castles, so he was having a castle in Scotland disassembled and reassembled here in the US piece by piece. On another occasion he asked me why I wasn't in college yet. The job was after high school and I was working as a plumber, and gave me an alright when I told him I couldn't afford to go yet and had to save up. Having a Scottish castle moved to the US and reassembled here is literally the plot of Gargoyles, a 90s cartoon on the WB. I'm kinda excited to see where this goes. Not a chauffeur, and I was a participant in this conversation. I used to tutor an oligarch's daughter in Rybalevka, the wealthy suburb outside Moscow. One day she mentioned that she likes to ski. I asked her which kind of skiing she preferred. Downhill is more popular where I'm from, but cross country is quite popular in Russia. It's even part of some schools' curricula. Her answer: my favorite kind of skiing is the type where you jump out of a helicopter. Silly me, I forgot about that kind. I was definitely expecting something much different. Not a chauffeur, but worked as a caterer for private jets, and the insane folks who owned them had a huge order from what I knew to be a smaller jet, so I really wondered about it. When one of the owner's handlers was training a new flight crew, he ordered $12K of meals for a flight that didn't exist just so the new flight attendants could practice the fine points of checking in a catering order. I listened outside after the food drop as the handler started explaining what to do to 6 of the most beautiful humans I have ever seen. We provided food for a lesson. The food was wasted. I found it in the dumpster outside one of the hangars the next day. About 25 years ago I had a summer job at a very tony country club. 6-figure joining fee, 5-figure continuing membership dues, and that got you nothing but the privilege of paying top dollar for rounds, food, etc. I was a porter some of the time, as we had cottages on club grounds for members to stay and make a weekend of it. One of my duties was driving members to and from airports, usually private airports for private jets. One time I'm driving 2 guys to the airport, and one of them starts complaining. Seems he and his wife are always fighting over who gets the jet every weekend, and where they want to go. Well, the other one replied, my 3rd jet is actually just gathering dust right now, since my son went to college. Wanna take it off my hands? They shook on it right there in the van. Not a chauffeur. A small part of my family was Chicago mafia. Grandpa told me a story of a family wedding in Chicago they went to in the late 60s. They were picked up at the airport by a limo with some high-ranking family members. On the way to the hotel they were stopped about 8 times by various police officers. The officer would walk up to the driver's window. The chauffeur would reach into a money bag and pass a bill to the officer. Nothing would be said and they'd take off again. Eventually my grandpa asked if they were being bribed. His cousin, Mafia, laughed and said, no, it's Thursday. That's when we pay our boys. So I guess that's how they did it. Looks like a traffic stop and in the open where it's not unexpected. So I'd imagine that chauffeur had seen some things. I'll answer for my grandparents. They owned a limousine business, I believe in the early 2000s, and my grandmother drove Mel Gibson around. She said he was nice and that he had requested to sit in the front passenger seat due to car sickness. Imagine hiring a limo and sitting in the front. In Australia we tend to sit in the front in taxis, so it could have been a bit of that too. Not a driver, but I used to caddy at a fairly exclusive country club in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where, no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a membership. You're either born into it or you marry a member. As a result, a lot of the members like to show off their influence by inviting guests who would otherwise be unable to play at the club. Someone invited Mitt Romney. We were given a heads up that the governor He wasn't a senator yet, would be coming, and they wanted us to know how to act around him. We were told he wanted to be treated like anyone else, but they didn't want us to gawk. So, I guess to make sure us dumb caddies weren't gawking, we were instructed to not look at or acknowledge the governor, because this is precisely how we would treat other people. I did get to shake his hand and chat a little bit. He was friendly, personable, way nicer than a lot of the members. I still don't like a lot of his politics, but he seemed nice enough in person. I used to work in politics and never heard a bad thing about how Sen Romney acts in his personal life. Seems genuinely courteous and respectful to people. I have deep ideological differences with him, but you can tell an elected's real character in how they treat underlings. I sometimes Uber drove in DC and they would order a ride, but instead of getting in the vehicles, they would just put a bunch of paperwork in your car and then you would deliver it to the next government building. Always felt kinda sketchy that government employees would send documents via Uber drivers, lol. I was driving as Uber and I picked up two businessmen in an industrial park. They were building developers. The man who was clearly the boss spoke to me as if I were a man and I was always the driver who picked him up. Although they were clearly from the Middle East, they chose to speak English. Maybe they thought it was rude not to, being in the US, but if that would have been rude, I'm not sure what the rest of the conversation was. They spoke about the future of business as if it were all so futile and how everyone will be either very wealthy, like them, or very poor, and how their children really won't be able to get jobs either but also won't need to. I logged more than 4,000 rides between 2015 and 2017 and that was one of the weirdest. The other weirdest guy I picked up from a dispensary. He was really good looking, very well dressed, and clearly well to do, but he was in some kind of mental distress. He wanted to visit more dispensaries but had clearly already bought the maximum. I got his hotel information through conversation and went there instead. On the way, he told me, in all seriousness, all about how his father was God, which meant he was Jesus. Didn't you notice how much brighter the sun became when I got in your car? He was serious. He also followed Guns N' Roses like they were the Grateful Dead. He thought Axl Rose was the smartest man alive. He didn't really notice when we got to his hotel instead of the dispensary. I did ask him if he had taken any other drugs that day and he insisted he hadn't. That was also one of the weirdest. It sounds like a guy having a severe manic episode. I am late to the party but I can absolutely contribute to this thread. Used to work for a private transportation company. Started my own chauffeur business last year. A couple things right off the top of my head that come to mind. 1. Had a really snobby family from another mountain state come to our state and the entire ride to their destination was spent talking about how much better their state was. Towards the end of the ride, the mother started cutting her toenails in the company vehicle. No idea how to react to that situation. Basically just had to let it ride. 2. Probably one of the wealthiest people I've ever met in my life was a gentleman who was a very high-ranking member of Scientology. Was also one of Bill Gates' close business partners. Never in my life have I been treated like I did not exist until that ride. Barely even got his name before he asked not to speak for the almost 2-hour ride. 3. Just previously I drove an NFL All-Star and he was one of the coolest people I've ever met, which was super refreshing. All I ever heard of celebrities, particularly athletes, was that they could be very rude. Guy was just a regular butt homie who gets paid 15 mil a year. Scientology guy sounds sus AF. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.